Chapter 5. Snape's Single Ladies' Semester. By the time Harry, Tom, and Jerry had survived their first week of lessons, they had learned 3 important facts about Hogwarts. First, staircases lied. They changed direction whenever they felt like it, just to see how interesting the screams would be. Second, ghosts had no sense of personal space. Nearly headless Nick had drifted through Tom twice during dinner, leaving his fur frizzed for an hour. Third, Professor Snape did not like Harry Potter at all. Snape's dislike was the heavy, oily sort that filled a room before he even entered it, like the potion fumes in his dungeon classroom. Harry wasn't sure what he'd done wrong beyond existing, but Snape's black eyes seemed determined to find fault in his breathing. Tom and Jerry had met Snape once in the Great Hall. He'd swept past like a particularly angry crow. Tom's instinctive arch and hiss had earned him a single, cold, withering look that could have curdled milk. Today was their first full potions lesson with the Slytherins. Harry had a creeping feeling that, by the end of it, curdled milk would be the least of their problems. The dungeon classroom was cool and damp. Shelves lined the walls, packed with jars of floating things Harry did not want to identify. The air hummed with faint bubbling and the faint metallic tang of simmering ingredients. Tom perched on Harry's stool, eyes narrowed, tail twitching like a metronome. Jerry sat on the desk, nose wrinkled, eyeing a jar of pickled something with deep suspicion. Had they been allowed to choose their seats, they might have hidden at the back. But Gryffindors and Slytherins were paired off at shared cauldrons, and Harry and Ron had been assigned the very front table, right under Snape's crooked nose. "Wonderful," Jerry mimed, flopping face down on the tabletop. The dungeon door banged open. Snape swept in, robes billowing like angry curtains in a storm. His black eyes scanned the room, lingering on Harry as if he'd been expecting him. Tom's fur puffed despite himself. Jerry mentally drew a skull and crossbones over Snape's head. "There will be no foolish wand-waving or silly incantations in this class," Snape began, his voice low and silky, the verbal equivalent of oil slicked over stone. "I do not expect many of you to truly appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion-making." Tom rolled his eyes in a way that made Ron snort. "Do not overheat. Do not substitute ingredients. I am not in the mood to scrape first years off the ceiling." Tom sniffed at the inventory of ingredients laid out for them. He wrinkled his nose at powdered moonstone, backed away from mistletoe berries, and batted curiously at a vial of essence of pearl that glowed faintly. Jerry watched the other pairs. Slytherins worked with a smug precision that made his whiskers ache. Draco Malfoy at the next table glanced over and smirked. "Don't blow us up, Potter," he sneered. "Some of us intend to survive this class." "Funny, I was thinking the same about you," Harry muttered. Snape glided closer at the exact wrong moment, like a bat drawn by the scent of backchat. "Is there a problem, Mr. Potter?" he asked silkily. "No, sir," Harry said quickly. Jerry, feeling reckless, mimed stomping on Snape's toe. Tom dragged him back by the tail. Snape swooped away, robes swirling. "All right," Harry said under his breath. "Tom, Jerry, no touching, no nudging, no anything. We cannot annoy him. We just need to get through this." Tom adopted a pose of wounded innocence, placing a paw on his own chest like, "Me? 'Cause trouble? Never!" Jerry crossed his heart with a paw, then promptly started chewing his quill. Within 10 minutes, Harry and Ron's cauldron was at least the right colour, if not exactly the right consistency. It hissed faintly, but didn't seem immediately murderous. Across the room, Neville's cauldron was puffing pink smoke. Seamus's potion had dissolved his spoon. Snape swooped from disaster to disaster, docking points mercilessly. It might have been fine, it should have been fine, except that trouble had a way of following Tom and Jerry like a very determined puppy. It began when Jerry noticed something on the next table. Malfoy's cauldron sat perfect and smug, greenish potion swirling placidly. On the desk beside it lay Draco's open textbook, and a perfectly round, perfectly ripe, perfectly unattended grape. Jerry froze. His world narrowed to that shining sphere of promise. He looked at Harry. Harry was reading the next instruction, brow furrowed. He looked at Snape. Snape was ripping into Neville's effort with acidic disdain. He looked back at the grape. He could do this. Jerry slipped over the side of the desk, slid down the table leg, and darted along the floorboards, hugging the shadows. Tom, seeing him disappear, hissed urgently and tried to grab his tail, but only got a whisker. Jerry reached Malfoy's table, peeped over the edge, and gauged the distance. Textbook. Grape. Safe zone. He took a deep breath, sprang, and landed lightly on the edge of the book without a sound. Draco and his hulking sidekicks, Crabbe and Goyle, were arguing about whether they could get away with letting Goyle do all the stirring. Jerry crept forward. He reached the grape, heart pounding, ears straining for the slightest hint of discovery. It sat there, glistening. He grabbed it with both paws. It was bigger than his head. His tiny muscles trembled. So worth it. He started to roll it backwards. He missed one small thing. Crabbe's elbow. Crabbe shifted, knocking the table. Jerry stumbled. The grape shot forward, straight at Malfoy's carefully measured vial of syrup of hellebore. Everything went very slow, then very fast. The grape hit the vial kipped. A few drops splashed into Malfoy's cauldron. The placid green potion frothed. It bubbled. It burped loudly. Malfoy and his goons turned just in time to see the surface ripple in a disturbingly eager way. Jerry, eyes huge, abandoned the grape and dove straight into Malfoy's open bag for cover. The potion exploded. Not a big boom, more of an exuberant pop like a champagne bottle, but with impressive force. Neon green foam geysered up, showering Draco, Crabbe, Goyle, and half the table in sparkly slime. Draco shrieked. Students screamed and ducked. Foam drifted down over everything, including Snape, who had spun around at the sound with deadly fury. One moment he was all black robes and sharp lines and hooked nose. The next he was drenched in shimmering greenish goo that clung to him like glitter-infused honey. The classroom went silent. A single bubble slid down his nose and popped. Tom clapped a paw over his mouth. Jerry peeked out of Malfoy's bag, wearing a foam hat. Snape wiped foam from his eyes with an expression that suggested someone was about to die. "Who," he said, in a voice low and terrifying, "is responsible for this?" Malfoy pointed immediately at Harry. "Potter," Snape snarled, "enough!" and snapped his fingers wandlessly. The foam shivered. It slid down, off everything, tables, chairs, students, and flowed, snake-like, across the floor towards Snape, as if obeying his anger. It climbed his boots, swirled around his robes, and then melted into him. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then something very odd began to occur. Snape gasped. His body glowed faintly green for a moment, like someone had drawn an outline of him in light. The glow flickered, then brightened, then flared in a blinding flash. Everyone shielded their eyes. When the light faded, a hush fell so complete Harry could hear his own heartbeat. Standing where Severus Snape had been was not Severus Snape. Not exactly. The hair was still long and dark, but it now fell in glossy, spiraling waves down over shoulders instead of hanging in greasy curtains. Her skin was smooth and golden brown, cheekbones sharp and flawless. The nose was straighter, the mouth fuller. The billowing dark robes had cinched themselves in at the waist and draped in a way that could only be described as dramatic, flowing, and shaped like some designer's dream. She was tall, fierce, radiant, and somehow gave off an aura that said, "I woke up like this." The classroom collectively forgot how to breathe. Tom's jaw dropped so far it practically unhinged. Jerry's little eyes turned into sparkling stars of disbelief. "Merlin's beard," Ron whispered. Hermione's quill dropped from her fingers. Even Malfoy gaped. Snape, still Snape, somewhere in there, looked down at themselves. Large, dark eyes widened. "What?" they breathed. And Harry could swear the voice was different too. Deeper? No, richer, silkier. It carried effortlessly through the dungeon, resonant and warm. They touched their hair. It bounced. They stiffened. "Mr. Longbottom," Snape said, trying for their usual cutting tone, but the new voice curved it into something more musical. "What, precisely, did you put in this potion?" Neville squeaked. I didn't. That wasn't mine. That was Malfoy's. It was Potter's, Draco yelped, still dripping faint green. Tom jabbed a claw in Draco's direction and pantomimed a nose growing 3 sizes. Liar. Snape raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Silence. The word rang in the air like a bell. Then something even stranger happened. Without warning, Snape's foot tapped. Just once, then again. A rhythm slipped into their steps as they paced to the front of the room, the way the new robes swirled it. Each stride had a beat. They shook their head in irritation. Their hair shimmered. "Class dismissed," Snape said tightly. "Out, all of you. Get out of my sight." No one argued. They fled. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Tom and Jerry were last to go. As Harry hurried out, he glanced back. Snape stood in the centre of the dungeon, one hand clutching the table, the other pressed to their forehead, eyes squeezed shut. Under their breath, with a note of absolute horror, they murmured, "Oh no." Then, very quietly, without meaning to, they started humming. It was a tune no one at Hogwarts recognised. Yet. If Hogwarts Castle had a gossip column, it would have set itself on fire by lunch. By dinner, everyone knew 2 things. 1, someone had done something to Snape. 2, whatever that something was, it had not gone away. Harry, Tom and Jerry sat at the Gryffindor table that evening with their ears flapping, catching fragments of rumour. "I heard he brewed a facial potion wrong, and it improved him." "Improved? He looks like a pop star." "My sister says some muggles look like that. They call them divas." Across the hall at the staff table, the evidence sat in plain view. Snape's transformation had settled. She now moved with a kind of accidental grace, every robe swirl and head turn punctuated by an invisible beat. The hair gleamed, the skin glowed, the cheekbones looked like they could cut glass. Tom nudged Jerry, then waved both paws in big, dramatic motions, miming a microphone, lots of spotlight, and exaggerated singing. His pantomime screamed famous, very famous. Jerry snorted, then attempted a wiggle-walk impression of the new Snape, complete with hips, until he tripped over his own feet and smacked into Harry's cup. "Who do you reckon's braver?" Seamus murmured. "You, facing you-know-who someday, or anyone who laughs at Snape right now?" "Definitely the second one," Ron said. Tom and Jerry, foolish and fearless as only a cartoon duo could be, laughed silently until they wheezed. Dumbledore sat serenely at the staff table, hands steepled, eyes twinkling with such force Harry thought they might burst into actual stars. "Who do you reckon's braver?" Seamus murmured. "You, facing you-know-who someday, or anyone who laughs at Snape right now?" "Definitely the second one," Ron said. Tom and Jerry, foolish and fearless as only a cartoon duo could be, laughed silently until they wheezed. Dumbledore sat serenely at the staff table, hands steepled, eyes twinkling with such force Harry thought they might burst into actual stars. Every so often, Dumbledore hummed along to something only he heard. McGonagall looked like she couldn't decide between being horrified, amused, or secretly impressed. The next day's potions lesson proved the truth of what everyone had been whispering. The transformation was not a one-time glitch. It was ongoing. "Sit," Snape said as the class filed in, voice clipped, trying very hard not to be melodic. "Open your books to page 112. And then, without warning, they spun. Not a full spin, just a half-turn, meant to dramatically indicate the blackboard. But it came with a flick of the robes, a sway of the hips, and a snap of the fingers that echoed. Somewhere at the back of the room, someone choked on a laugh and turned it into a cough. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, were in that class. This was important. They had already decided that life was about making mischief. They now decided that life before this moment had been practice. Fred leaned toward George. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" he whispered. George, eyes alight, whispered back, "If I were a poet, I'd write an ode." Tom and Jerry, sitting on Harry's desk, watched like they'd been given front-row tickets to a show. The first real incident halfway through the lesson. Seamus's cauldron, true to form, had caught fire again. Snape swept toward him, robes billowing like a storm cloud. "Extinguiscio!" they snapped, wand flicking. The flames hissed and died. Seamus sagged in relief. Snape turned to the class, hair gleaming in the dungeon's murky light, and said in a voice that rang like a bell, "Now, if you had properly listened, you would have—" And then a beat dropped. Not a real beat, a feeling of one. Snape's foot tapped. Their shoulder rolled. Their hand, still holding the wand, made a sharp, precise little triangle in the air. The words shifted. "Put your hands up," they sang. They hadn't meant to. It came out perfectly in tune, rich and powerful, with a rhythm none of them had ever heard before, but somehow wanted to clap along to. The room froze. Every Gryffindor stared with open mouths. Every Slytherin stared in horrified fascination. Fred Weasley's jaw dropped. Then his face split into the most delighted grin Harry had ever seen on a human. "Oh, my saints!" he whispered reverently. Snape went rigid. "If you had put your hand up," they corrected sharply, enunciating each syllable like it had personally offended them. Their cheeks coloured, just barely, under the golden-brown skin.
Fred leaned over to George. "Did you hear that?" he breathed. "That was—" "Melody," George whispered. "Harmony. Power. Brother, I think we've been blessed." Tom clutched his own chest, miming swooning. Jerry made a little scribble in the air. "Single ladies," he wrote in his own head. Not that he knew the words, but the vibe, immaculate. Over the next week, the full horror, or glory, depending on your perspective, of the accident revealed itself. Madame Pomfrey checked Snape thoroughly and declared in clipped tones that the potion had fused with some latent glamour magic, and due to the precise combination of ingredients and Snape's own magical signature, it was stable, unchangeable, for at least a term, she'd said. Snape had nearly fainted. Every time Snape grew angry, frustrated, or simply raised their voice, the new magic hijacked the moment. "Mr. Weasley, if you blow up one more cauldron, if you like it, then you shoulda put a lid on." The line burst out like an unstoppable spell. The class erupted. Tom fell off the desk, howling silently. Jerry thumped his tiny fists on the wood, tears streaming down his face. Fred and George exchanged a look that said, "We have just discovered our life's calling." They began taking notes, not on potions, on Snape. "Day 3, George scribbled in the margin of his textbook. Snape spontaneously riffed on "to the left" while rearranging cauldrons. "Take that beaker to the left, to the left." Day 5, Fred wrote, saw Snape unconsciously doing a flawless body roll while berating Malfoy. Malfoy, traumatized, worth it. In the corridors, students would occasionally hear snippets. Snape sweeping past a gaggle of first-years. "You must not run in the halls." "I can see your halo." No, that's not what I meant." Snape scolding Peeves. "If I were a boy, no." In double potions with the Hufflepuffs, a cauldron erupted in gold sparks. Snape spun, wand raised, and before they could stop themselves, belted, "I woke up like this." Stunned silence. Snape cleared their throat. "Because this is what happens when you are careless," they finished lamely. Fred and George lost all composure. The twins began a secret project. They called it Operation Single Snape. They collected quill scribbles, whispered versions of lyrics, little snatches of mysterious lines none of them understood. "Who run the world? Diva is a female version of a hustler. Baby boy, you stay on my mind." Tom and Jerry were in heaven. Outside of class, whenever Snape stalked down a corridor, Tom would poke Jerry and immediately mime a dance move, hip wiggle, hair flip, dramatic point. Jerry would sync up, and the two of them would perform a tiny, silent parody behind Snape's back. Once, Snape glanced over their shoulder sharply, suspicious. Tom and Jerry froze. Tom became the very picture of cat innocence, grooming a paw. Jerry struck the kind of stiff pose only a taxidermied mouse might envy. Snape's eyes narrowed. Then, from somewhere deep and traitorous, a low hum slipped out. "All the single first years, all the single first years." They slapped a hand over their own mouth, horrified. Fred and George, loitering at the end of the corridor, slid down the wall laughing until they cried. Even the Slytherins weren't entirely immune. Pansy Parkinson had been heard whispering, "I mean, Professor Snape looks kind of amazing. Don't you think?" before quickly correcting herself into a scowl.
Draco alternated between outraged mortification and grudging awe. Once, after Snape swept into the common room and shut down a planned prank with a flick of the wrist and a cool, "I must have caught you bluffing," Draco muttered, "I don't even know what that means, but I felt attacked." The real masterpiece moment, however, came 2 weeks into the term, during a double potions where the Gryffindors and Slytherins were concocting a particularly tricky swelling solution. Tension was high, ingredients were volatile, and Tom and Jerry were bored. Snape paced between tables, robes swaying, hair bouncing in soft curls. They executed a tight turn that would have made any dancer jealous, then leaned over Harry and Ron's cauldron. "This should not be bubbling. Did you add the pufferfish eyes after the bat spleen?" Harry swallowed. "Yes." Snape's nostrils flared. "Instructions, Potter, are not—" And then it came again, strong, unstoppable. "Something you can just surfboard over." The word surfboard meant nothing to the wizards, but it meant something to Tom and Jerry. Tom choked. His whole body shook with silent hilarity. Jerry clutched his sides, panting. Fred, from 3 tables over, slammed both hands on his desk. "That's it," he said. "I'm starting a songbook." George nodded fiercely. "We will immortalize every single accidental line. Future generations deserve this." Tom, suddenly inspired, glanced at Jerry. Jerry glanced back. Ever since the explosion, they'd been trying, in their own chaotic way, to figure out if the accident could be adjusted, maybe softened, maybe at least controlled. Tom's eyes slid to their shared ingredient basket. Jerry's eyes followed. He saw extra moonstone dust, a sliver of dried asphodel, a forgotten vial of essence of poppy, and, tucked behind the slightly singed pages of Ron's notes, one other thing, a single tiny glob of the original neon foam, preserved in a cork-stoppered test tube like a trophy. Seamus had collected it, for science, and then promptly forgotten it at their table. Jerry's pupils dilated. If a drop had done this to Snape, what would a drop of a drop do? He looked at Tom. Tom, thinking of the possibility of intensifying or perhaps redirecting the effect, waggled his eyebrows wickedly. Jerry made a dismissive little wave. Not on Snape. They'd caused enough of an uproar there for now. He pointed discreetly at Malfoy's back. Everyone jumped. Jerry flinched. The tube slipped. Instead of a delicate drip into Malfoy's cauldron, the tiny glob of foam shot through the air in a glittering arc and landed squarely on Snape's shoulder. Time slowed. The foam sank into their robes, shimmering. Snape's eyes closed. "Oh, no," they whispered. The magic surged again, bright and loud. This time, it didn't just gloss over their features and adjust their hair. It amped up everything that had already changed. Their posture straightened, their hair shone brighter, their robes cinched a little more, trailing elegantly. Their eyes sparkled. Fred gripped George's arm. "Oh, yes," he breathed. Snape's mouth opened. Music no one else could hear filled their head. A beat, a thrum, a rhythm that matched the pounding of their own furious heart. They tried to say, "Get back to work." What came out was, "All the single cauldrons, all the single cauldrons, put your lids up!" The line soared up to the ceiling, rich and flawless. Tom and Jerry slowly rotated to stare at each other, pupils reduced to pinpricks of unholy glee. Snape slapped both hands over their mouth, horrified. But it was too late. The class had heard. For one stunned second, everyone was silent. Then the dungeon exploded with laughter. Even some Slytherins snorted before catching themselves. Fred and George were gone, clutching each other and howling. Ron wheezed. Harry's face hurt. Hermione tried to look disapproving and instead only squeaked. Snape's face, still golden brown, still unnervingly flawless, went very, very still. The dungeon temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "Detention," they said flatly. Their voice still carried a faintly musical ring, but the tone was deadly. Weasley, Weasley, Finnegan, Potter, Granger, entire Gryffindor table, out. Somehow they managed to swallow the urge to sing the next line, but their foot still tapped. As they stormed to the front of the room, Tom and Jerry ducked behind the cauldron, their own shoulders shaking uncontrollably. "This is all your fault," Jerry mouthed accusingly at Tom, jabbing a paw into his chest. Tom jabbed right back. "Your idea," he pantomimed, dropping the tube. Jerry mimed shaking paws. Accusations flew. Between them, behind the cauldron, Hedwig's treat tin, Harry's, had fallen open from the commotion. Hedwig wasn't there, of course, but Tom and Jerry rifled through on instinct, even in the midst of disaster, stress-eating small owl treats as if they were popcorn. The next few weeks cemented Single Ladies Snape as the greatest running joke Hogwarts had ever known. Not that anyone dared call them that to their face. In class, Snape became even sharper, more precise, snapping out instructions with the clipped desperation of someone wrestling their own larynx. But every so often, the glamour magic surged, hijacking a phrase or a movement. During a lecture on antidotes, they said, "You should learn to think like a survivor." During a rant about copycat homework, they muttered, "Stop acting like you're irreplaceable," under their breath, then froze as Fred, George, Tom and Jerry all made identical ooh faces. Once, late in the term, a cauldron exploded in a shower of glitter because 2 Hufflepuffs had accidentally mixed the wrong stabilizers. Snape raised their wand, fury blazing. "I am not here to make your mundane lives flawless," they sang. It rang. It echoed. Somewhere in the back, someone started quietly clapping to the beat. No one ever found out who. Fred and George turned the whole ordeal into an art form. They began a secret pamphlet, Snape's Greatest Hits, The Dungeon Sessions, verses like "Tom and Jerry helped." Tom faked fainting at the best ones, sprawled dramatically on the flagstones. Jerry mimed fans screaming, swooning over an invisible superstar. They even developed a tiny synchronized dance they did only in corners, involving hip wiggles and finger snaps that looked suspiciously like something ripped right out of a Muggle music video no one at Hogwarts had ever seen. The rest of the staff responded in their own ways. McGonagall pretended nothing was different, lips thinned to near invisibility, though if anyone looked closely, her foot sometimes tapped under the table when Snape sang inadvertently about checking on it. Flitwick took actual notes about how emotional magic could intersect with vocal projection. Sprout hummed one of the strange melodies while watering mandrakes, and then startled herself into dropping the watering can. Dumbledore, of course, beamed through the entire term, occasionally offering Snape comments like, "Marvellous breath control, Severus," and "I do hope you'll consider performing at the end-of-term feast. The acoustics in the Great Hall are excellent for your genre." Snape's glare could have melted cauldrons, but the glamour didn't budge. Through it all, Tom and Jerry, who had lit this fuse without quite meaning to, watched Hogwarts warp around the new reality with wicked delight and, occasionally, a pinch of guilt. Once, very late at night, Harry, Tom and Jerry were creeping back from a secret snack heist in the kitchens, Tom burping quietly, Jerry clutching a stolen grape like treasure, when they heard something from a nearby classroom, a voice, Snape's voice, singing, not involuntarily, not mid-rant, softly, carefully, alone. "Pretty hurts," the words floated through the keyhole, rich and aching. "Shine the light on whatever's worse." Harry peeked through a crack. Snape stood at a window in an empty classroom, moonlight silvering the transformed features. Their reflection stared back at them, unfamiliar. They touched their own cheek, jaw tight. They weren't dancing. They weren't rolling their hips or whipping their hair. They were just standing, letting the song spill out, low and honest, like it was a weight they had to put down somewhere. Tom and Jerry stilled. Jerry's ears drooped. Tom's tail slowed. Harry gently tugged them both back. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's leave him. Her. Them. Whatever. Let's give them one thing that isn't a joke." They tiptoed away, the last notes of the song fading behind them. After that, the jokes continued. The dances, the pamphlets, the silent parodies behind turned backs. Hogwarts thrived on it. But every so often, when Snape's eyes looked particularly tired beneath the perfect hair, Jerry would hide his imaginary frying pan and mallet back a little deeper in his invisible pocket. And Tom, impulsive and soft in ways he'd never admit, would arch his back a little less when Snape swept by, just in case they were having one of those nights. Still, there was no denying it. For one unforgettable semester, Hogwarts had the most fabulous, fiercest, most accidentally iconic potions professor in history. All thanks to a wayward grape, some overconfident foam, and a cat-and-mouse duo who had no idea what Beyoncé was, but knew a legend when they saw one. Fred and George summed it up best one evening in the common room, poring over their growing collection of snappy lyrics. "Do you realise," Fred said, "that we're living in a golden age?" George nodded solemnly. "Someday we'll tell our kids, we were there, we saw Potions Beyoncé." Tom and Jerry sprawled on the hearthrug, tails lazily swinging in time as they wordlessly mouthed along to a tune no one else knew, but that, somehow, every heart in Hogwarts had started to recognise. And downstairs in the dungeons, a voice that could have filled stadiums said flatly into the mirror, "If one more student clicks their fingers in my class, I will expel the entire house." Then, unable to help it, they spun on their heel and stalked away, robes swaying, every step on the beat.